I'm gonna see if I can't pull the okey doke real quick on this live broadcast while I try to share my screen. And I'm gonna, one moment, look for this interview. And it's actually very interesting. Um, one moment. Very, very interesting. Where's it at? Nancy Isenberg. There we go.
Their music to address racism and politics.
So let me pause that. Go to my screen. Share. Application window. Windows Media Player. Share. Play. So this is the Q&A for Miss Nancy Isenberg's White Trash. Throughout this broadcast,
Q&A, Louisiana.
I'm going to pause like I just did now, and I'm going to expound certain points. I won't stop while they're in the middle of sentences. I will let them speak, and then I will make the point that I'm going to make before I carry on into the latter part of part 2 of the book.
A State University professor and historian Nancy Isenberg. Professor Isenberg talks about her book, White Trash, the 400-year untold history of class in America.
Nancy Isenberg, author of White Trash, you talk about a professor in your preface by the name of Goethe Lerner, my doctoral dissertation advisor, had a keen passion of demystifying ideologies. What impact did that have on you?
Well, Goethe was a very unusual person. She came to the University of Wisconsin to set up the women's history program. She had to create a space for us in the history program. And she was someone who was very aware not only of gender and class and racial issues, all those things that she wrote about, but what I think she imparted to me that you also have to understand is the politics of academia and the way in which politics in general. We like to believe in America that we're free agents and that we're able to sort of carve our own destiny. That's part of our mythology. But in fact, we don't always get to make the choices that we think we do. And she always emphasized the importance of thinking about the larger way the culture, politics, the law shapes the way people think, even though they might not be aware of it, but to take that into account and to not just take things as given. Challenge them, see if it's really true. And that's something that's really motivated me throughout my career, is that even when you read good history, I want to make sure I look at the endnotes, make sure I look at that source, and I don't want to just take the consensus. I actually want to see if it's true and make sure that any argument that you make has a firm historical foundation.
How hard was it?
Okay, so first off, right there, the first part of the book that we read, right, has nothing to do with this lady, Miss Gertrude, and it's no offense to her, but it's just to give once again rise to what I'm talking about. Is that you would think in a Q&A with C-SPAN, who has had some controversial interviews and speakers and topics and plights spoken on that are sometimes easily more overlooked. His first question wasn't even about the actual book itself. It was about a person that that was an inspiration to her, and that's deflective to the nature of the book, because that doesn't talk about what the book speaks on. You see, so understand already. You see, it's much bigger than people think it is. It's much bigger than one can say. Uh, 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 what's the word I'm looking for? It's much bigger than one can give it credit for in just a single stroke. Uh, Take into consideration the fact that within the first chapter, she explains how these were waste people, people who were saw unfit within the society of England, as they consider, or the British Empire, and however these people were waste people, and why that may seem like it's whatever, it actually plays a huge part in why uh, uh, her book is so I don't know how to put it in words. It's like they praise the woman for the effort and the compilation of the data, but the way that it's put forth is in a way that it placates, implicates, exacerbates, mitigates, exonerates. You see what I'm saying? All these things perpetrates. And I don't want to keep going on with this, but it does this. Um, um, and she just said that that they had no choice. You know, just to play that back to you real quick. You know, she says right here, like,
that we think we do, and she always emphasized the importance that we think we do. Very aware, not only general. We like to believe in America that we're free agents and that we're able to sort of carve our own destiny. That's part of our mythology.
Pause. So when you have a person say something like that, right? But then you have men like Benjamin Franklin, right? Who would say, something along the lines of one moment. And this is and it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but it really is when you have a man who's accusing uh, his own people of being lazy. You see, and far too many times, if a person like her uses that kind of language, it's to be believed and to be taken serious. But you have a man in Benjamin Franklin, you know, uh, who in one sense people would try to say that he was self-made, but if you really read into the story, he's not self-made. He's a good speaker who finds himself in the right circles of people, and that bestows him with the ability to undertake entrepreneurship. But he says here, page 68, white children become proud, disgusted with labor, and being educated in idleness are rendered unfit to get a living by industry. Now understand, for a man to say this and then for her to say that, she's hundreds of years displaced. So her opinion on the matter is skewed at best. But we're just going to carry on.
Trash. I think part of the reason that I don't want to just take the consensus. I actually want to see if it's true and make sure that any argument that you make has a firm historical foundation.
How hard was it to name this book White Trash?
Well, it went through various names. It started out with White Trash, then it was going to be The American Breed, then it was going to be Waste People, and then it got back to being White Trash. I think part of the reason that it needs to be that name is it's the one that today is the most familiar. People have, I think, misconceptions about what it means. So I think people are curious about it. And that's why I wanted to write the book, because I think people throw around that word without really knowing where it comes from. And when I began to do more and more research, and as you know, I talk a lot about British colonization, which is not what people have ever really paid attention to in talking about white trash. Most people just start in the antebellum South. But I found a much older history, and I felt like it was important to pay attention to language. That's why not only do I use the term white trash, but I use all the vocabulary that was used to talk about the poor, because I think we miss something about how people think about poverty.
To elaborate what she's saying right now, she means that people think that white trash only was ever in the South. And what she says by all the different terms right now is that she's speaking to say that there was always been poor white people in this country. So the association that they only lived in the South, or that they're to be associated with the South, is a false allegation against the Southerners.
We don't understand the language and what those words mean.
We have all those words available to put on the screen, which we'll do now, and there are lots of them. White trash, is it all?
Look at this list, because they're not going to say them all, so I'm going to read it. Waste people, offscourings, lubbers, bog trotters, rascals, rubbish, squatters, crackers, clay eaters, tackies, mudsills, scalawags, briar hoppers, hillbillies, low downers, white niggers, degenerates, white trash, rednecks, trailer trash, swamp people.
Scorings?
Yeah, offscourings, yeah.
Offscourings, lubbers, bog trotters. I mean, right. I don't know how to pronounce some of those. Rascals, rubbish, squatters, crackers, clay eaters. Where did all those terms come from?
Yeah, this is what's so curious. I mean, you find each generation reinventing the vocabulary. The first term, the term that I pay a lot of attention to, is waste people. And the reason for that is that goes all the way back to Richard Hakluyt, an Elizabethan, who put forward the first proposal to convince Queen Elizabeth I on the importance of colonization and what would the colonies be used for. And we have a whole mythology about how we think America was founded. We usually like to talk about the Puritans. We like to talk about the city upon the hill. I mean, President Obama referred to this at the Democratic Convention. Reagan invoked that metaphor. But in fact, the majority of people who came to the New World came out of economic desperation. They fell into categories of convicts, indentured servitude, who were, this isn't sort of labor contracts. Essentially, they were a form of slave labor, in the sense that they didn't have the right to leave. They would sign up for.
You pause that right there. Let me go ahead and find this part and go ahead and read something to you real quick, because when a person says things like that, right? It's very, very, very peculiar that they don't draw upon the points in their own book. You see, she really is not talking about how white people were pretty much, pirating here in the lands, not wanting to be what's the word I'm looking for? Not wanting to be under the oversight of another man that they thought looked like them, who owned slaves and owned all the property, and they didn't. Yet once again, when we had last went over, some of these men were selling their land for a glass of rum, So I don't know. I just look at it as if it just doesn't make sense. Like, for example, when she says that these people were made to be pretty much servants, when it says something, landless trespassers who were not servants promised only widespread leveling, by which surveyor meant a society shorn of desirable class divisions. So what I want you to get is, well, where did the lazy white people come from if they all were like indentured servants pretty much when they got here? You understand? And if a man came here and had land, why would he become a lazy lubber? her distinctions don't fall hand in hand. Either they were lazy off tops and they acted as if they were going to be a servant and got here and didn't do anything and couldn't anybody make them, or or they came here, they worked, and then somehow they felt as if they were mistreated and then they stopped working, and then now that makes them lazy because they don't want to work. However you want to perceive that, that's how she's putting this off. But I'm just looking for this piece where it says specifically that these men were what's the word I'm looking for? They were known for this. They were, I mean, like it was something that they did. Like they like they were known for like running away, abandoning their servitude, and then becoming like banditos, as they would, as she put in the book. Uh, and I just can't find it. Once again, the fact that it was written the way it was, I can remember it being just that. But let me see something real quick. This is funny. Once again, people who lived in Carolina, right? This is what he says about North Carolina. For Byrd, Virginia was almost an Eden-like colony and a far cry from her uncivilized neighbor. In the bemused letter of 1726, written 2 years before he began his tour of North Carolina, he described himself as a man resting underneath his fig tree, surrounded by my flocks and my herds, my bondmen and bondwomen. Whew, that is so deep, y'all just don't even know. Part feudal squire, part modern Abraham. This is what she says herself. Byrd portrayed his colony as a bucolic retreat far from the vagrant mendicants roaming the island of beggars, by which he meant England. He pretended that poverty did not exist in Virginia. His slaves were both dutiful and productive. A well-ordered society based on slavery had not allowed him to indulge in a pastoral dream, but had also kept poor whites at bay. Did you hear that? It also kept the poor whites at bay. Man, listen, man. Come on, man. Let's get back to what she's saying.
Or an indenture term that could go from anywhere from 7 to 9 years, and the large majority of them were children. And that's something I think we forget about. We forget about the exploitation of child labor, which, as we know.
Oh, and that was page 52, chapter 2. Excuse me.
Was legal in this country all the way up to 1919. But waste people, as Hackleck defined the term, literally was that idea of dumping the poor somewhere else. They were a burden on the British economy. And in fact, that notion of waste has all those negative connotations that you can bring to mind when we talk about waste. And the Elizabethans, one of the things that I think is very refreshing and disturbing about them is that they're very clear. They don't conceal anything under the pleasant language of the Enlightenment. They're very forthright and direct about what they mean about waste. And that's when I began to see that there was a connection between these notions of waste, expendable people, surplus population, and how the other big theme I highlight is the importance of how waste people are connected to the land. And this is something that historians know, but we often lose sight of the fact that land, or being landless, is possibly the most important definition in our history of whether you have civic value, whether you can have economic independence.
Where do you live and what do you do full time?
Stop. So, first off, y'all just heard me finish what it just said on page 52. So that slightly negates what she's saying, because this man's saying that his situation was so good, right, that he was able to keep poor whites at bay. So that means that he was able to do enough for them. To keep them at bay isn't just to keep them back, but that's also to keep them satisfied. Just enough. You see what I'm saying? Now, when she uses the term waste people, this is what I'm trying to get y'all to envision. Envision this. In one part of the book, she's claiming that these people have the skills of husbandry, right? Even if they got lesser desirable land, this is lesser desirable land hundreds of years ago. And oh, they can be like, oh, well, with what tools? With your hands, with making them. If they're supposed to be these ingenuitive people, so intelligent. So it's like I don't understand how they couldn't make it happen. Um, Outside of that, uh, 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 there's so many different things that I've not badgered about the difference between the so-called white trash people and the black slaves that she compares them to so often. But one of the things that she goes over in this book, and I have yet to find the page, um, but she speaks on when white farmers, pretty much white tenant farmers, indentured servants, their need for a hearty meal, which consisted of bread, beer, and a sustainable amount of meat, whereas the slaves were able to be fed with, corn and potatoes. I mean, it just, it, there's nothing that people can say, you know, you know. Uh, 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 for example, page 31. The first slave cargo arrived in Boston in 1638. That's what okay. Winthrop, for his part, owned Indian slaves. His son purchased an African. Now understand, Indian slaves are enslaved already. You see what I'm saying? And she doesn't talk about this very much, but it's a known fact, y'all. Okay. So when I do my thing about Eskimo Joe, Eskimos are a type of Indian. Please don't get lost in what I'm saying. Stay with me. While servants were expected to be submissive, few actually were. Numerous counts show masters complaining of their servants' disobedience, accompanied by charges of idleness, theft, rudeness, rebelliousness, pride, and a proclivity for running away. Now let's go ahead and just point something out to you. How can that be true and then the country have been built? It doesn't match up. What are these? How many are the numerous accounts? You see what I'm saying? Like, we have to really understand, y'all. Like, these are people who got on ships in the numbers of the hundreds, no resistance. And then all of a sudden they started resisting. No, the people that were running away were the Indian slaves. However, I'm not going to go into that. And then black slaves followed suit after a while, but not all black slaves, because it wasn't like all slaves always tried to run away. It was only certain slaves. However, let's stay with the idea of white trash. And I just wanted to talk about how how uh how these men, were predisposed to not wanting to work. I mean, that's crazy, you know. You know, those of mean descent would learn from a sharp tongue or a ready wit that submission was expected of them. Puritan wariness did not end there. Among servants and those of mean condition above them were men and women of enlarged ambition who were deemed undeserving. And this is talking about, people who were above blacks, but not rich whites. At least, and this is page 31 and 32, at least according to anxious oligarchs, Puritans never opposed commerce or the acquisition of wealth, but they were clearly conflicted when it came to social mobility. The government enacted sumptuary laws, punishing those who wore rich silks or gold buttons in an attempt to rise above their class station. Are you hearing this? So it's like they had laws to keep people down. So How poor are you if you have laws from the people above you to keep you down?
I'm a history professor at Louisiana State University. I really enjoy New Orleans. I enjoy my colleagues. We have a really, I think, supportive department. And I have, like a lot of academics, I've taught at several places. I've taught at the University of Tulsa. I taught in Iowa. I had a postdoc at William and Mary. So I feel, in a way, I have some. This is probably the one thing I have in common with my subjects is they have been a bit of a vagabond and a vagrant, throughout my academic career.
You mentioned your mother in the preface. Why?
Well, it just, those things, even though you're a historian, it's amazing how you may not know the full details of your own family's background. And my mother at one point told me, and with my sister, we visited her birthplace in Texas, deep southern part of Texas. And I was curious, well, how did she end up getting there? Well, her father, whose name was McDougal, essentially had a job for transporting laborers from Canada down to Texas. And that to me is telling because it's part of one of the stories that I'm telling when I talk about indentured servitude. This idea that rather than thinking of America in the way we like to think of it, the most positive way, as an exceptional society, that we broke free of the class system at the time of the revolution and were the land of opportunity and upward mobility. In fact, as I argue, what both Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and this continues to be part of our way of thinking and the real pattern of how people define themselves economically, what was really being promised was horizontal mobility, the ability to keep moving. If you move one place and fail, you move somewhere else. And that to me resonated with what my book was about.
Where did you grow up and where did you go to college?
I grew up in South Jersey near Philadelphia. I went to college at Rutgers University, and I went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin at Madison.
I want to run some video. This is jumping way ahead from where we started, but
we're gonna not worry about this video right now. I'm gonna minimize this, escape, stop sharing, and go into reading of certain parts of part 2 of the book. And to stress, you see, once again, it's just to stress that when she speaks on these people who are considered, downtrodden and overlooked or somehow not given a fair shake, that there's many different notions that it was very opposite, that they actually had a chance, they just didn't capitalize on that chance, and they squandered their opportunity. Where we left off is at chapter 6, pedigree and poor white trash, bad bloods, half-breeds, and clay eaters. And the quote for this one is, everywhere they are just alike, possesses pretty much the same characteristics, the same vernacular, the same boorishness, and the same habits. Everywhere, poor white trash. Daniel Hunley, Poor White Trash, Social Relations in Our Southern States, 1860. So, here we go. The sectional crisis that led to American Civil War dramatically reconfigured the democratic language of class identity. The lowly squatter remained the focus of attention, but his habitat had changed. He now singularly a creature of the slave states. The terminology for poor white Southerns changed too. So listen, right then and there, did you hear what it just said? It said the squatter was singularly a creature of the slave states. So the squatter wasn't to be found in the northern states. Can you dig it? So this is why they associate that with the antebellum South. Even though when the video first starts, as you heard her say, they associate it with the antebellum South incorrectly. But that's not improper. Actually, it's proper for them to associate it there because the American Civil War is a turning point in American history. And for them to say, or for her to say that it's not, but when I say them, I mean, all the people who contributed to the writing of the book, the studies, the research, the searching out of the information, those people all deserve to be called out in the manner and fashion that she has spoken for all of them, saying that that's not what it is, but in fact it is. Carrying on, it says dirt poor Southerners living on the margins of plantation society became even more repugnant as sandhillers and pathetic, self destructive clay eaters. It was at this moment that they acquired the most enduring assault of all, poor white trash. However, is it really an insult if it's true? See what I'm saying? To make up a name for you and call you something is one thing. But if you're considering yourself white people, which, however, we're not going to go into all that. And she doesn't even go into the fact that they make up the term white to combat the fact that they start to feel outnumbered by all these different people. Anyway, man, it's just, anyway. Though white trash appeared in print as early as 1821, the designation spread popularity in the 1850s. Gained widespread popularity in the 1850s. And let's go ahead and say this right here. 1821 and the 1850s are much different. You're talking about, some of the more tumultuous years to the years leading up to the Civil War. There's a difference in the language of the people, and if these guys are, once again, 30 years is a long time. That's a long time for the country to have transformed itself. For more places that have industrialized their cities, so to speak. These are the very beginning stages of what people know to be as the Industrial Revolution, because this is where people start to try things out. However, what I'm getting at is that they're pushed down from the northern states to the southern states because there's nowhere for them to mooch anymore, for real. But once again, they moved up to Appalachia, okay? Before they did all that. You see what I'm saying? So, and she's not talking about that right now, though. You see what I mean? She's talking about just the Southerners. But the fact that people don't talk about, the Appalachian hillbillies, that's why people don't associate it. But a hillbilly and white trash, regardless of what they try to say about working, it's the same kind of person. It's the same low down mentality that they have. They practice certain levels of sensibility when they feel as if it's going to benefit them. However, and this is things that this book points out. I'm going to skip forward a few pages to my next mark until I see something that I want to point out to y'all. All right. Okay. Here we go. Check this right here out. A similar doctrine of hereditary suicide had already been applied to American Indians. This is on page 140. Jefferson's paternalistic projection of acculturated natives was no longer endorsed by most Americans by the 1840s. A starker and dogmatic ideology took hold, arrogantly nationalistic. Native American tribes, a biologically degraded race, could no longer coexist with their Saxon superiors. In 1844, with the cold nonchalance, one writer captured the mood. They retire before the axe and plow like the forest they once inhabited. The atmosphere of the white man is their poison. They cannot exist among us. The red man was doomed to utter and was doomed to utter and entire extinction. Okay, the red man was doomed to utter and entire extinction. There we go. I'm like, why is it not making sense to me? Even though I read it. This belief was not new, just more publicly accepted. Henry Clay had privately voiced had privately voiced the same conclusion 20 years before as the Secretary of State. So listen to this right here. They already were talking about the doom of Native Americans. You see what I'm saying? And she brings this up just talking about some stuff, right? Uh, 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 uh. And this was just right after what I had read to you guys before about the mulattoes being a breed of faulty or degenerated stock. That's anyway. That shit is so racist. Anyway, check this out. Let's read this real quick. Spanish heritage could also possess up to 1/8 Indian blood. The lower castes were, this is page 142, were composed of mestizos of Spanish and Indian background, Indians and Africans. Now, the word mestizos is also synonymous with the word mulatto. So understand this wordplay. Again, American men who married well-born women were embraced by Mexican society. Are you hearing that? So, American men who married well-born women were warmly embraced by Mexican society. As a consequence, after 1836, Texans retained the Mexican distinction between the noble Castilians and inferior racially mixed classes. By the time of annexation, Anglo-Texans, and the reason why is because these are white Spaniards, and they didn't mind white people mixing with them to make them more white again, because they had been blood mixing and shit. Anyway, now when they call now listen. When she says inferior racially mixed classes, that's her own. She can say that that's a historical notion, but that's her own notion. She's not putting quotations around that. So she's able to, once again, she's using historical notions in the defense of it being a historical notion to be a racist ass bitch. You see what I'm saying? Her and this Andy Bernstein dude. The fucking racist as I don't know what, you know. Once again, this is one of the hardest books I've ever read. This book is so racist. So racist. However, we'll keep on going. And this is once again, this is the pedigree and poor white trash. You see, and so let's just read it. 143. The heavy-handed rhetoric cut both ways. Texas was to be rescued. Texas was to be rescued to strengthen America's pedigree. But the admission of too many Mexicans into an expanding union could undermine America's racial stock. So how does that make sense that the Mexicans embraced the Americans, but the Americans didn't embrace the Mexicans, unless they're not talking about a certain kind of Mexican, they're talking about a Spaniard Mexican, the Castilians to be specific. Listen, there's a reason why that is, okay? Okay, because if you listen to what it said just on the page before, it said that the mestizos of Spanish and Indian background, what they really meant was black Indians. Okay, right on. And when they say Spanish, okay, Spaniards are known mulattoes, a lot of them. Okay. Anyhow, carrying on. Indians and Africans. So when it says what it says here of too many Mexicans expanding into the territory, if they're considering the Afro-Mexican, the black Mexicans that were who had been there for forever, Mexicans, right on, then once again, it's a play on words, yo. And you got to understand this. It's deeper than that. Here we go. This shit is deep. This had nothing to do with nothing. But let's just read what she was talking about first, okay? And I gotta read this to you. As ludicrous as it sounds now, he proclaimed that Texas would magically drain free blacks, 1, mulattoes, 2, and other African mongrels, 3, from the United States. those has 3 different so-called black diasporas. Thank you very much. They knew about different black people back then. Man, this is page 142, a final paragraph, but let's just keep going. Siphoning off the dangerous dregs of slavery passed into South America. It was a racist theory with a familiar ring to Benjamin Rush's migratory model of 1789, in which Pennsylvania would filter out the weaker squatters by dispatching them to the lazy, cracker-filled South. Are you listening to that right there? So she's distinguishing that the guys in the North weren't lazy like the dudes in the South were, but if you listen to the dudes in the South, it's the opposite. So it's like, and she writes it like this in her book, and I've already covered parts like that. So it's like, man, who is she trying to kid? If they had dudes in the South who were from Germany and stuff like that, and other countries who were building a nation for them, those guys, they can't be calling them lazy. They have to be talking about the Englishmen, who some of them even picked up. But even those guys were just, once again, they were bandits and thieves and all that kind of stuff. Who were the bandit and thieves in America if they weren't? Somebody had to be doing that. And she don't even talk about that. She makes it seem as if they were just poor white people suffering. We're not here doing no kind of wrong. And when she does talk about them, she separates, the action of them from modern white trash, as if the violent ones are different from the ones who aren't acting violent at that time. However, here we go. This shit is different. It's crazy. Walker simply added another piece of pseudoscientific evidence to make his case. A high number of free blacks in the northern states suffered from insanity. Now, they don't even specify what the insanity is. Here was another example of political arithmetic gone awry. Since the Southern senator intentionally misused the U.S. Census data, as Alabama's Josiah Nott had done, on black inmates in northern asylums. So listen to this. They got free, right, from being slaves, to go to these asylums to do what? To become victims of all kinds of atrocious fucking experiments. Did she highlight that? No, she did not. Of all that pseudoscientific talk she just, man, y'all better understand. This book is deeper than that. This book is deeper than just white trash. There's a lot of different points where she tries to do this. Okay. Now let's just go ahead and get back to breeding right here, okay? And back to why it doesn't make sense that they talk about people being debaucherous and fornicators, and then yet they encourage people to go and have babies. Listen, paragraph 4 or 3 on page 143. Breeding was expected to be an increasingly important weapon in America's imperial arsenal during the one-sided war. Yankee soldiers were expected to settle in occupied territory, marry beautiful senoritas, and achieve a new kind of annexation. This was what happened in California, as illustrated by the remarkable career of a young Tennessee officer, Cave Johnson Couch, a close friend of President Polk. He married a daughter of a wealthy Mexican rancher. Those are the ones who were well born. Okay. Received a large tract of land from his brother-in-law and built a grandiose home, which he filled with his 10 children. By the 1860s, he owned over 23,000 acres and had established himself as one of the ruling patriarchs of the new state. This is why they did that. Right on? This is why. Because the Mexican dudes were like, at least my family won't get killed off if I get married in 2. Listen, man, y'all got to understand how this shit is so deep, dude. And a lot of them were Spaniards. Okay? Straight up, real Spaniards with white skin. Had daughters with white light skin. So when they made babies, the babies look white. Anyway, going forward. Here we go. I love it. The California gold rush not only attracted not only grizzled gold diggers, okay? True, that you can take that however you want to get it, okay? But also prostitutes, fortune hunters, and con men selling fraudulent land titles. Once again, who were those con men? Who are those grizzled gold diggers? Who are those prostitutes? Do you understand me? Right. This is deeper than that, y'all. It's deeper than that. Going forward, we're just going to skip some pages because I could just keep reading to y'all, man. Oh, here we go. No, stop. I can't even. Here we go. Paragraph 1 of page 145. He said, free blacks likewise lived in filth and degradation. I don't know how else they were supposed to live when they didn't have nothing. Helper complained about Californians drawing on animal analogies whenever possible. Americans, English, French, Chinese, Indians, Negroes, and half-breeds could never find common cause over a gold mine any more than a panther, lion, tiger, bear, or could in hovering over the body of a fresh-slain deer. The Chinese provoked contempt, for they had the gall to imagine that they were superior to Anglo-Saxons. These, in quotations, semi-barbarians shared the fate of the Southern Negro. Both the copper of the Pacific and the ebony of the Atlantic were destined to be permanently enslaved. Are you hearing that? See? So understand. This is why I always say what I say about China. Like, I don't care about China crushing America. Let them. Anyway, keep them going. Keep it going. Once again, this is supposed to be about the pedigree, okay? But it's not really talking about the pedigree of the people. It don't really go over that. It's like it's a bunch of different information meshed together and trying to make it go her way. Listen to this. Free soil rhetoric fed the belief that freemen, this is on page 146, free soil rhetoric had fed the belief that freemen could not coexist with slaves, just as Anglo-Saxons could not live side by side with Indians. Now, when they say the word Indians, you got to understand, they mean these black-skinned Indians, not the red-skinned civilized ones. Slavery was a dangerous contagion, spreading death and decay and feeding a class demographic war by depopulating the nation of its white inhabitants. Really? Here we go. It was unfair to divest them from the land, of rob them of their posterity's rightful inheritance. With haggard features and emaciated forms, the poor Southern families that headed west represented a new class of poverty, worse than any seen before. By banishing her sons, the essayist of 1843 concluded slave owners were warring against the vital interest of the entire non-slaveholding population in the South. Free soilers imagined three possible scenarios in eliminating slavery. First, if the West was to remain uncontaminated, slavery had to be kept out of all new territories. Second, by prohibiting the migration of slavery into Western territories and states, it seemed plausible to some that the institution would gradually die off in the Old South. Stop right there. That's a lie, because when they first went to Georgia, these same lazy-ass white people were sad that they couldn't own slaves. And once again, you can refer back to my last video for all this information. You know, this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. It's double-sided language, duplicity. She can't say one thing and then be saying a whole nother. Like it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. You know, going forward, we're just gonna keep pushing through this chapter and get to chapter 7. 1 second. Here we go. All knew that poor whites were cursed because they were routinely consigned to the worst land: sandy, scrubby pine, and swampy soil. This was how they became known in the mid-19th century as sandhillers and pineys. Now hold on one moment. Now these are people who, as opposed to actually trying to do something with the land, they did nothing with it. Nothing. And when they had good land before that, when it was just considered less desirable, when she couldn't give this description to the land, right? Because they hadn't destroyed the land like that yet, right? Now they have the audacity to complain about the condition of the land, which they've done to it. Here we are. Forced to the margins, often squatting on the land they did not own, they were regularly identified with the decaying soil. The poor whites of hard scratch were, in the words of one, stony, stumpy, and shrubby, as the land they lived on. In a throwback to Buffon, Helper insisted that the degenerate population produced men and animals that were dwarfed into shabby objects. In 1854, Henry David Thoreau took the same theme to his darker corner of the imagination. The slave South was a rotting corpse, he wrote, and should at best be used to manure the colonizing West. Equating poor whites with human detritus, he described a people whose only function was to act as as fertilizer for the territories. Now listen, this is the same mindset that they had when they sent the people over here at first, when they used the term waste people. Offscouring means manure or fertilizer to fertilize the land with. Now, if they felt that the South was dying, why did they have to have a war over trying to fight the fact that they were producing so much cotton that the lady says here herself. One moment, let me go back a few pages. Let me see if I can't find it. Where she compares it to a deity to the people. A false deity. Here we go. Page 145 coming into 146. California mining was worshipped in the same way cotton and slavery had become the false deities of the South. Now hold on, but the California gold rush doesn't touch slavery and cotton. It'll never get even close. You're talking about cotton. They were producing like 70% of the world's cotton, dude. 80% of the world's cotton or something like that, maybe even more. But I know, like, at one point in time, like, they were producing like a mass majority of it. It cost them nothing because they paid the slaves nothing. All they did was produce enough food. And then they tried to make it seem like producing the food for slaves was like a fucking issue. Like feeding you is an issue, right? You see what I'm saying? Yet the same people that they had brought here initially, before there was any slaves, apparently, didn't even know how to till the land to get it right. But the slaves could till the land to where in which you could actually get cotton out of it. Why couldn't they get cotton before? Ask yourselves this stuff, yo. Ask yourself that. Huh? Right. It's a skill to pick cotton so that way you don't tear your hands up. It's a skill. Once again, what slaves were the slaves who were going to be rebellious when they were whipping people on the back? How are they known for being rebellious and doing all these things? It was like she accused the slaves earlier when I was reading that to you of some kind of wrongful behavior, as if they were supposed to just fall the fucking line with somebody trying to rule over them. However, with all the biblical analogies in this book, these people aren't biblical. These people aren't close to biblical. She compared a fucking Gentile ass heathen to Daddy Abraham. How insulting. How insulting. You think Abraham whipped his bondmen and bondswomen? No, I don't think so. It's unthinkable. It's unthinkable. It's unthinkable to think of the term of a righteous master and then an evil one, right? There would be no difference if how you treated your slaves was all one and the same. However, carrying on and going forward. Let's just read this real quick. The vagrant, the squatter, had been withdrawn, yet qualitatively he or she remained the same. A piece of white trash on the margins of rural society. Observers recognize how the moving mass of undesirables and the constantly expanding West challenged democracy's central principle. California was a wake-up call. Ancient Southerners focused attention not only on their slave society and slave economy, but on the ever-growing number of poor whites who made the permanently unequal top-down social order perfectly obvious, who really spoke of equality among whites anymore. No one of any note. Let us put it plainly. On the path to disunion, the road was strewn with white trash. Look, it's so insulting for the lady to insult the intelligence of the reader, to say things like that, and then to not point out once again, like these same people that she's talking about, the road to disunity, the North and the South, where once again the South had a strangler's grip on cotton globally, strangler's grip. And because she won't identify, because she's a Jewish woman herself, who the actual slaveholders were, which were Jewish people, it's hard for people to understand the resentment the English would have for the other slaveholders. And then why wouldn't these other slaveholders just put their people on? See, I don't understand it. You know, I mean, like, I want y'all to really think about this. If a person was willing to give Benjamin Franklin thousands of dollars back in the day, so that way he could front the equipment needed, right? Get the land titles, buy all this stuff, get slaves, all these types of things, right? What kind of person does he have to be, or what kind of person are the people not who were doing this for him, or what kind of what's the word I'm looking for? What type of allegiance has he made with the people? Because the ultimate part about it is that they try to make it seem as if these white people that were poor were just totally helpless, and they weren't. Many of them were given land that they just gave up on. I mean, like, once again, how many times do I have to read to you that these dudes were giving away their land for a glass of rum? Wow. Wow. And have the audacity to complain. It doesn't make any sense. However, we're going to move into this chapter 7. Cowards, poltroons, and mudsills. Civil war as class warfare. You have shown yourself, you have shown yourselves in no respect to be the degenerate sons of our fathers. It is true, you have a cause which binds you together more firmly than your fathers. They fought to be free from the usurpations of the British crown, but they fought against a manly foe. You fight against the offscourings of the earth. That's President Jefferson Davis, 1863. See, now, understand. Jefferson Davis is the Southern president, comparing the people of the North to manure and excrement. So the fact that he could compare them to them, and once again, there was a level of Southern nobility. This is why in the movie Django, Calvin Candy acts like he is so cultured, because the people who are around Calvin Candy, if you didn't pay any attention to it, almost all the white people, with the exception of Mr. Mowgli, were all these same kinds of white trash people. But they seem content with their lives. The men who they called the Brittle Brothers seemed content with beating niggas and branding them, torturing them. They seemed content with that. So it's just like, once again, for there to be a quote in this book about people who prefer to whipping Negroes than actually working themselves, it gives credence to this. She put it in the book herself. I didn't make that up. So for a person to try to say that these people were once again downtrodden in any way, shape, or form, it goes against the notion of white thuggery. You can't be poor white thugs and be downtrodden all in one. The two don't match up. They don't make sense. However, here we go. One moment. Trying to see what I want to touch on with this chapter. Okay, here we go. Bam. We got something here on this page. So let's just start reading. Let's see what it says. Jefferson Davis and James Hammond, this is page 158, spoke the same language. Confederate ideology converted the Civil War into a class war. the South was fighting against degenerate mudsills and everything they stood for: class mixing, race mixing, and redistribution of wealth. So once again, for there to be people to not to be talking about wealth redistribution as something new, or race mixing is new, or class mixing is new, and once again, this is because you have free blacks in the North, free mulattoes in the North, free black Indians, free Aboriginal blacks. You understand? And other types of people from other races in the North who were race mixing and class mixing, which the South understood this is the fastest way to eradicate the white man. However, as one angry Southerner, as one angry Southern writer declared, the Northern Party should not be called the Northern Party should not be called Black Republicans, but Red Republicans, for the real agenda was not just the abolition of slavery, but inciting class revolution in the South. And when they say Red Republicans, they mean blood Republicans. You see what I'm saying? You know, it's funny, the Black Republicans. And so understand, who are they attacking when they say Black Republicans as opposed to Red Republican? Understand it. Who are the Black Republicans? Why would a white man call himself a Black Republican? Be real. Okay then. Okay then. Because blacks have held public office for a long time in this country. And they held it more so back then than they do now. Believe it or not. Believe it or not. It's crazy. The advantage that a house Negro would have over a modern field white man servant is the fact that he would hear the modern language being used on the highest levels of vernacular by a slave owner, therefore giving them a much better vocabulary, no matter how you look at it. However, we won't even get carried away into all that. Confederate ideologues turned the language of class and breeding for obvious reasons. They were invested in upholding a hierarchy rooted in the ownership of slaves. When in 1861 Jefferson Davis spoke of domestic institutions, he meant slavery, and its protection formed the central creed of a new constitution that bound men of one flesh to the new nation. Vice President Alexander Stephens, in a speech given in Savannah on his return from the Constitutional Convention, took pains to make Hammond's mudsills theory the cornerstone of the Confederacy. The delegates had instituted a more perfect government. First, by ensuring that whites would never oppress classes of their own race, and second, by affirming that African slaves, substratum of our society, is made of material fitted by nature for it. Wow. Is made of the material fitted by nature for it. You understand what they're trying to say? They're saying that you're made to be a slave by nature. Anyway, refuting the premise of Lincoln's 1858 House Divided speech that a nation cannot stand half slave, half free, Stephens equated the Confederacy with a well-constructed mansion with slaves as its mudsill base and whites its brick and marble adornment. Presumably, the brick represented the sturdy yeoman and planter elite is finely polished. And the planter elite is finely polished alabaster. So what it's saying is that the blacks were supposed to be the mudsills, the white man was supposed to be the brick, and that nice marble was supposed to be the upper echelon of all the white people. Class concerns never lost their potency during the war. In 1864, as defeat loomed and the South's leaders contemplated augmenting the army with slaves, some feared that the rebel nation would fall deprived of its lower layer. So they're saying that if they implemented the blacks within the nation or within their army, they would fall because, once again, Who's going to do all the work? Right, right, because the white people in the South weren't accustomed to work. They came there trying to be just like their northern neighbors who acted as if they didn't have slaves, and they got rid of slavery first because guess why? They stopped needing everything that slaves had because they had all the other forms of industry. They didn't need cotton anymore. They controlled the high seas. They controlled all the imports and the exports. And then once they started to exploit the natural resources of the land, then they really didn't need slaves. Okay. And then that brought out the greed of the white man. They needed white men to fight Native Americans, Black Indians, okay, and some of the red ones. However, I'm not going to get carried away with all this. This is just one of those things where it has to be spoken on. Going forward, let's see. Here we go. Bam. Page 160. Very last paragraph. With the docile workforce, the South had eliminated conflict between labor and capital. Southern intellectuals alleged that laboring class in the northern states was large, disruptive, jealous of the rich, and endowed the unwarranted and endowed with unwarranted political privileges. As Hammond and others saw it, the notion of equality had become most deceptive fiction of the times, had become the most deceptive fiction of the times. The very freedom to think, to feel, to act, a writer warned in Charleston's Southern Quality Review, and Charleston's Southern Quarterly Review, nurtures passion and provokes unholy desire. That unholy desire was the longing for social mobility. Slaves were content in their menial lot, many believed. In this strange, reversal of the American dream, the South's superiority arose that almost ironically from its absence of class mobility. So what this means is that they're saying that, once again, white people who had everything never meant for the poor white people to ever have nothing. So the fact that this book is just trying to say that all white people ain't never been rich, but we all already know that. But it's trying to placate them for not having nothing. They had an opportunity to have shit, y'all. That's what I'm trying to say. They had an opportunity and they blew it. And this book, on parts right here where it's trying to justify the people in the South and call them Southern intellectuals, right? They're Southern intellectuals because of what? Because they found a way to get paid for nothing, and because other people who lived up north, right, had a reason to hate people who were rich because they were like they could see that most people who were rich didn't do anything to be rich. They ripped other people off. They made unfair deals. Okay, and then they have the nerve to call a poor man white trash when it's like, well, what do you call rich white trash? Is that it? Rich white trash? Is that what that is? Because or do you just call him a businessman, a very good businessman? There's too much fuckery there, moving forward. I ain't gonna talk about all this Confederate War stuff because I don't care. Civil War nonsense. I'm gonna read something to you. Women, right? That they don't talk about a lot. But this is huge during the Civil War. Listen to this. Female rioters were, in this way, the equivalent of male deserters, and there was a lot of male deserters. Can you dig it? They shattered the illusion of Confederate unity and shared sacrifice. In 1863, in the wake of Richmond riot, Vanity Fair exposed the persistence of deep class divisions among the Southern population. The pro-union magazine published a provocative image with the article, "Pity the Poor Rebels." It described how poor men were arbitrarily rounded up as conscripts, while the desperately poor white trash of the Confederacy scratched the words, "We are starving," over the dead wall that separated the North and the South. So understand that these are people who, I'm not going to say that they deserved it, but these are people who, once again, They come from ancestors who killed all kinds of Native Americans and did so happily. Uh, I haven't gotten carried away with the whole idea of what a cracker is and how these guys used to have like eye gouging contests and stuff like that. Just wicked stuff. And somehow they want you to feel bad for these people. I'm not gonna feel bad. I refuse to feel bad for them. I refuse. I refuse. She tries to make the Civil War seem like it was still worse than slavery. Like once again, how could the number of slaves gotten so high and then nobody was owning them? Nobody fucking owned them. Nobody. But they were somehow they was fighting a war for the slaves, and people would tell you that oh the slaves are already free. That's a damn lie, dude. That's a bold faced lie. Okay, they wouldn't have accounts of women floundering all over sorry ass Union troops and the likes if that obviously if they never freed nobody, right? However, man, here we go. We're gonna move over and read this next little part. I got a little bookmark, all my little ghetto little bookmarks. Last paragraph, page 169. And I'll start in the middle of the second to last paragraph. The Confederacy was built, Garfield insisted, on a false idea, not of common government, but a government of gentlemen, of men of money, men of brains, who hold slaves. It was a government resembling the aristocratic old world. His audience of commoners roared when he called the top two Confederate generals, Count Bragg and my Lord Beauregard, excuse me. Roused by this reaction, Garfield addressed the friendly crowd as "you mudsills," for they were benefactors of a government and society that promised class mobility as a genuine respect for the working man. For Garfield and for many others, the mudsills were the backbone of the Union. They were those who rejoiced that God has given you strong hands, stout hearts, and were not born with silver spoons in their mouths. And proud mudsills they would remain. So understand, you have one part of the Southerners who were aristocratic people, right? The highest level of the slave owners, Jew boys, who were talking down about people being mud seals, who were getting other poor whites to fight their civil war for them, while you have on the other hand people using the term mud seal right on in the Union side against the Confederacy as a way to arouse the people, and notice that that even though people want you to get the South associated with poor whatever squabbling, they're associated with aristocracy. Because notice he compared their generals right on to Count Bragg, right, and my Lord Beauregard. So understand that that's the level of aristocracy that those generals were going out there with. And to compare the Northerners, when he calls himself a mudsill, he's saying that. Man, this is huge. This is huge. The the whole thing about it is that people have to respect it. You know what I'm saying? People have to respect it. They have to respect it. It's they want you to believe that the North had all the money, but it didn't. The South had all the money. They had all the cotton and everything. The North just had natural industries that were starting, but they couldn't compete with the South cotton slave machine because once those industries are starting, what's to stop the guys who own all the slaves and all the cotton down there from buying you out? Nothing. So it's just one of those things where because there's that difference in the language between a northern general to the southern generals, it should tell you everything as to what the scene really looked like, despite the fact that the North or the South had poor whites in it. And I already gave you an idea of what kind of aristocratic kind of person you would be thinking about. Think about Calvin Candy and then all the people he surrounded himself with. Okay. All right. Here we go. Where we at? Nope. Nope. Here we go. Union men had a way of identifying, this is page 173. Union men had a way of identifying white trash with the dual boogeyman of Southern poverty and elite hypocrisy. They saw secession as a fraud perpetrated against hapless poor whites. A Philadelphia journalist had the best, or at least the most original put down of the Confederates' overproud social system when he directed Jeff Davis's government to put a slave on their 5 cent stamp. For only then, he argued, would poor white trash be able to buy the cheap cattle. The, for only then would white trash be able to buy the chattel, buy the chattel cheap. But he didn't let this fellow Southerners but he didn't let his fellow Northerners entirely off the hook either. Little separated Northern mudsills from Southern trash. Neither class gained much when reduced to cannon fodder. So once again, it was poor white people in the North versus poor white people in the South in the Civil War. And they try to make it seem like, oh, it was brother versus brother and this, that, and the other, and family versus family. That's ideology. But that doesn't change your class. See what I'm saying? So if you believe that like rich brothers were like laying each other out during the Civil War, you guys are smoking big dope. You feel me? Like that's impossible. It's literally impossible. That was poor white people, the same kind of poor white people who lay each other out right now to this day. To this day. You know what I'm saying? The same kind of poor white people that go inside of Waffle Houses, you shoot it up and then take their clothes off and get naked. That same kind of shit right there. It's no different. These are the same people. They've only been given a couple dollars more. But a lot of these white dudes are one paycheck from being white trash, certified, bona fide, straight up white trash with his AR-15 ready to scalp him a nigga. That's truth. And I know a lot of y'all don't want to hear that, but I want to tell you, this is white trash review. I'm not nice about stuff like this because this is us listening to the book, right? And I'm gonna go back to her little interview here in a second. I still got that down there, but I wanted to get this done for the most part. And I'm gonna read this entire page, everything about Dubois until it stops, because it's very important. Thoroughbreds and Scallywags. This is chapter 8. Bloodlines and bastard stock in the age of eugenics. It is better for all the world, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or let them starve for the imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. Three generations of imbeciles are enough. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Buck versus Bell, 1927. Now let me read this to you about Mr. W.E.B. Du Bois. I personally think he's a sellout, but it doesn't matter because he came around just like a lot of other sellouts come around, like normally right before people get ready to die, they become, you know, the best version of them. But it doesn't matter because when they were most capable, they didn't do anything, you know. But now that they're no longer capable and no longer a threat, they can be honest. It's the worst form of cowardice. However, here we go. In 1909, at the National Negro Congress in New York City, W.E.B. Du Bois gave a provocative speech on the reception of Darwinism in the United States. The published version of the speech, The Evolution of the Race Problem, Du Bois declared that Darwinism had found such favor in America because the very idea of survival of the fittest ratified the reactionary racial politics that already prevailed. The Harvard-trained scholar underscored, with more than a touch of irony, how the splendid scientific work of Darwin endorsed the inevitable inequality among men and the races of men that no philanthropy ought to eliminate. Now, what he's saying is that since these people are automatically better than these people, no level of humanitarian work or aid should be sought to level the playing field between these two species where one is automatically superior than the other. However, and she says that Du Bois was being ironic, but Du Bois was being serious to impose what a man had said upon a audience of people who were receptive to it, because these are people who were listeners who believe these things. However, carrying on going forward, Du Bois' argument went this way. Now, this is what she's trying to tell us, what Du Bois' argument is. This is one of my biggest problems with this lady. If y'all haven't heard me say what she's been saying, she's trying to tell you what somebody else is saying. But I'm going to read that, but just take it with a grain of salt, please. Du Bois' argument went this way. If one accepted the assumption that blacks are of inferior stock, then it was pointless to legislate against nature. Proving the supremacy of the white race needed no help from politicians, because any form of philanthropy would be powerless against deficient cerebral development. So what he's saying is that no matter how much you help them, if they're stupider than you, they'll never get smart. They'll never be smart. But that's what she's trying to argue, that why once again, she's trying to argue that he argued that if you have rules or legislation that makes it to where blacks can't do certain things, right? Like get certain jobs, certain places, hold certain levels of office, it goes against the fact that whites are superior, because if they're actually better and superior, they'll normally outperform these people. But by making them not have to outperform these people, you actually diminish the white man. However, we're not going to go into all that, because she don't go into all that. For the social critic, Du Bois was in one short step from the racism contained. For the social critic, it was one short step from the racism contained in the Americanization of Darwinian selection to the realization that white rule had corrupted the normal course of evolution. Instead of allowing the best, whether black or white, to rise, racism had actually undermined the Darwinian argument. It had not only not improved the white race, but a false hegemony, there we go, had led to the survival of some of the worst of mankind, some of the worst stocks of mankind. And hegemony, let's look that up real quick. I don't exactly remember what it is, but I do remember looking it up. 1 second. HEGE. Bam. And it is leadership or dominance. So, okay, but the false leadership or dominance. Okay, there we go. Once again, it's like I didn't want to get into all that, because when I first read it, I felt some type of way as to why didn't she just say supremacy the first time. However, as much as the lower class of whites remain where they had always been, one found throughout the U.S. South efficient Negroes, able and productive, being trampled under the heels of elected officials who supported white vigilant justice and propped up the heinous lynch law, catering to the interest of unreconstructed white trash of the post-war South. Stop. Can you dig it? Do you really get what he's saying right now? He's saying that by them making these rules, right, and them being racist, they've allowed this what is it? They've allowed and otherwise it would have been impossible. So hear me. If white people really didn't hate black people, it would have been impossible for them to want to lynch black people if they were actually better than you. Do you understand that? This is the whole point that Du Bois was really trying to make, was that, like, if they were better than us and we competed and they were just naturally better, it would show, and they would naturally always be better. And there's no need to make laws that make lynching people okay and things like that. Now, this is one of the only times she she actually says anything that kind of knocks white people. But even now, she doesn't call it white thuggery. She called it white vigilante justice, and then called it heinous lynch laws. Well, what were these white vigilantes doing other than hanging niggas and tarring them and feathering them? Come on, man. Double-sided language. Double-sided. And this is the worst kind of person, you know. Uh, um, um, this is a real review, okay? Because most people won't review a book like this. They won't actually take the time to go into the book. They'll just tell you stuff out of it, you know, and highlight their favorite parts or what they think are great parts. I don't have time to do that. I have time to skip around, read certain things, break down what we're reading, what we're hearing. Um, we're into the 20th century pretty much for the most part. So she's going to go between the late 1800s, right, just after the Civil War, and then the early 1900s. But let me go ahead and read this because I got a bookmark here. So on page 184. Here we go. It's got to start right here, back on page 183. This is deep, y'all. You know, it goes into everything that I've been saying. In 1868, Francis Blair Jr., the Democratic nominee for vice president, toured the country and made the mongrel threat one of key issues of the campaign. Wow! Anyway, this is just the kind of stuff that I had to deal with that I'm glad that you guys are getting to hear. The next year, Chief Justice Joseph Brown of the Supreme Court of Georgia issued a monumental decision. The rebel governor ruled that the courts had the right to dissolve all interracial marriages. Amalgamation was classified with incestuous unions and marriages between idiots, which the state already prescribed by generating sickly and effeminate children. Brown insisted such abhorrent marriages threatened to drag down the superior race to the level of the inferior. He was repeating the established definition used by animal breeders to categorize a mongrel. Even more telling is Brown's eugenic logic that the state now had the right to regulate breeding in order to prevent contamination of the Anglo-Saxon stock. Come on, man. What else do you need to hear about these dudes? What else? Here we go. Hold on. I got one for you. I love it. Last paragraph of 184 going into 185. A brilliant piece of Democratic propaganda was the autobiography of a scalawag. The protagonist, John Stubbs, had been born to a poor family of 14 in Shiflett's Corner, Virginia, a community known for lowlifes and criminals. Joining the Confederate Army, he slid from an artillery post to a teamster to cleaning Jefferson Davis tables. He had no ambition for honor or glory. His wartime trajectory was predictably downward. Deserting, Stubb lied to the Yankees that he was a Union man. Returning to Virginia in 1866, he became a scallywag and found he had a talent for, get this now, nigger speaking. He defended Negro suffrage not on any high principle stand, but on his low-down motto, every man for himself. Now, this is the one time they talk about carpetbaggers. Here we go. Stubbs knew that carpetbaggers had no respect for him, but he didn't care as long as a generous supply of whiskey accompanied their snubs. I just have no idea, man. This shit is so deep. The carpetbagger is like a few pages back. We're not going to get into that because she doesn't actually call the Jews carpetbaggers. The term carpetbagger is a what's the word? He was like a traitor of his people, but like she didn't call him the Jew. Right on. He's not called the Jew. You see what I'm saying? And the carpetbaggers only talked about a few times. Like, let me go ahead and find the exact page, and then I'll put his ass on blast real quick. I didn't too much care for it because because once again it tries to exonerate, you know, the Jews who were here, you know, and that's not fair because here we go. Page 182, and we're going to start in the middle of it. The emerging cross-sectional opposition party named two more symbolic enemies, carpetbaggers and scalawags. Here is how the new narrative went. When ill-bred men of suspect origins assumed power, virtue and government declined. The despised mudsills of Civil War era was succeeded by post-war Yankee invader. By the post-war Yankee invader. The carpetbagger, a rapacious adventure feeding off the prostrate South, could be identified by the cheap black valise he carried. Worse than the carpetbagger, though, was the scallywag, a betrayer. He was a Southern white Republican who had sold his soul or sold out his race for filthy lucre. Now understand, the carpetbagger, doesn't matter how you put it, is the Jew boy, okay? Is the real Jew. Now, is she going to say that? She never once points out Jews really in this book. Never. Even though she has a Jewish ass name. Even though she's a Jew. It's just one of those things where it's like, you have to really understand. At the very beginning of this, you know, and I'll go back real quick after I get done with this chapter. And I'm going to see how many more chapters until part 3. Because, I mean, it's just really suspect. You know, the entire way that the book is written. You know, she makes it seem as if you know it's not white people's fault that they don't have anything, and it's like I want to believe that, but I don't. You know what I mean? Like I don't believe that, but I would like to believe that white people just have never had a fair shake. They've always been screwed. You know, they've had it worse than black somehow. Whatever. Sure. If that's the story that you want to put out there. But it's like, when this is the case, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Oh, my goodness. Come on. Thank you. Bam. When we have people who say stuff like this,
to be that name is it's the one that today is the most familiar, is that even when you read good history, I want to make sure I look at the endnotes, make sure I look at that source, and I don't want to just take the consensus. I actually want to see if it's true and make sure that any argument that you make has a firm historical foundation.
Now let's stop and look at this lady's face for a second. Look at her hair. Her hair don't lay flat down like a lot of white people telling you that she's mixed with something. She has something in her, more than likely. Me and Andre Wickham the other day we're talking like she's one of the people that she's talking about. She is white trash, okay? But she's white trash who's elevated in this society now. So she don't have to get looked at like that. You know what I'm saying? This is only part 2. I got another part for this tomorrow, you know, which talks about the white trash makeover, which I really don't care for, but I have to give you all this so that way I'm being fair to her own plight. Now I'm going to skip forward to about, let's say, 15 minutes in. I'm going to hit play real quick.
Elect of the average American is something that unfortunately politicians have been taking advantage of for a long time in this country. I mean,
let's go back because she's talking about the intellect of the average American.
What we want in America is not a real democracy because we accept huge disparities of wealth. We want a democracy of manners. What we want our celebrities or our politicians to do is act like us, pretend to be like us. And this idea of being a stage performer, this idea of sounding as if you can, invoke the feelings, the voice, the attitudes, even the dialect of the average American is.
I've been reading to you guys about how class is everything. 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 And they've been saying anything but that in this book about what she's saying. So she's going against the actual content of her own freaking novel. Do you understand that? It doesn't make any sense, y'all. And I'm not cherry picking right now. I'm letting her talk her own speech. She got to say her own piece. But her own piece goes against what she has written in this book. That doesn't make any sense.
Something that unfortunately politicians have been taking advantage of for a long time in this country. I mean, you can take it all the way back to Andrew Jackson, because he was the first one who had a campaign biography. He was the first one who was turned into the candidate for the common man. In fact, when he's running, he's a fairly successful slave owner, wealthy. He's no longer one of the common men, but what he did have in common is that it was always remarked that he sounded like the common man because he slammed oaths just like crackers. So that idea of talking to the people has that dark side of the demagogue who can manipulate people. But it's something that in our American tradition that we're supposed to think they're more authentic. We're supposed to think that they're more real, or we have a direct connection to them. But unfortunately, with every phase of the mass media or how campaigns have been orchestrated, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get a more honest, authentic candidate.
What is going on here in this clip? To set it up, this is from 1979. It's a now deceased Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia. It wasn't his original name. He got a law degree at American University. He got his actual diploma handed to him by John F. Kennedy. But what is going on here? He's the senator.
To that person on their terms. Show them that you're people in Washington, but he was drawing on this other tradition. I talk about the story of the Arkansas Traveler, which goes all the way back to the 1840s, where it was the elite politician who had to get on horseback.
Now pause. Listen to this. They're trying to make the book about politics somehow. The book's not talking about that. The book barely ever touches on that. Like what she's speaking on are like select excerpts out of her book. Her book speaks on blood mixing, race mix. I keep talking about race mixing in this book because it comes up so much. It doesn't stop coming up until like the very last chapters. You know what I'm talking about? But like, we're forced to like go over this, and I don't know, man. You know, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. Let me read something to you guys out of the book real quick, and I'm gonna stop sharing this because she's about to make me angry just looking at her face. Page 186, called Cracker Joe. Right? I want y'all to listen to this, okay, and really understand how heritage is everything to these people. And this is why, the insult like your granddaddy's a nigger used to really get to white people and used to really get under their skin. It still does. If you tell a white boy, man, you feel me, your grandpa's a nigger, he probably ready to kill you. It's on everything. On everything. Look. Cracker Joe, 1883, written by a New Englander. The title character's story was set in Florida and used love and forgiveness to overcome past wrongs and resentments. Joe, a born cracker, runs a successful farm. He defies his heritage by exhibiting shrewd ambition. He is a go-ahead man, an avid reader with a phenomenal memory. He calls his wife Lucy, the whitest woman, soul and body I did ever see, suggesting that he is not quite white, but only a cracker, So that term cracker don't even mean a white person. Can you dig it? Bam, that's one. Like the family of Harriet Beecher's Stowe's Dread, Joe is a half-breed. His mother of good blood. So listen, I mean, his daddy's a what? Thank you very much. He is forced to make amends with the son of a wealthy planter whom he tried to murder more than a decade earlier. And for his part, the planter's son must reclaim his father's dilapidated mansion and spoiled lands, saving his legacy in the only way possible, marrying the daughter of a New York carpetbagger. If this isn't improbable enough, Joe has a mulatto daughter whom he welcomes into his house, his home with his wife's blessing. Listen, if Joe is a half breed, he's a mulatto. Do you understand? Off tops. So they must mean that Joe's daughter, his first daughter, is actually black and more than just a mulatto. Can you dig it? If Joe's a half breed, man, y'all gotta really get it, Joe. Okay, man. Once again, that's the duplicity of language, and the duplicity of language was played out in a thing back in 1883. But she's using the language of how the man wrote to explain the story that she wants to explain, and then use the words that she wants to use. But Joe's a mulatto, so his daughter would be at least a quadroon, which is a quarter black person, which is so fucking racist. Anyway, however, if she's considered a mulatto, that means that either her mother's mixed like Joe, or her mama black. You take your choice. But remember, Joe daddy black. And Joe's married to a carpetbagger's daughter, who's the whitest woman he ever did see. Come on, man. Right, follow the story. So this is why I'm all over this shit. Because she presents the story one way, but that's not what's going on. That's not what's going on. That's not what you're reading about. You see what I'm saying? I'm going to try to read it again to see if I can't find the part where it says that these white women were really really into black dudes pretty much, and it made me think that there's one quote in here. Um, what's the word I'm looking for? There's one quote in here, man, that it kind of it speaks to that. It speaks to that whole part. Here we go. Give me one moment. Let's go ahead and read this real quick about this whole thing. Charles Davenport, this is page 194. Charles Davenport established a research facility at Long Island's Cold Spring Harbor in 1904. His facility grew into a eugenics record office. A Harvard-trained biologist and professor, Davenport, along with his team, collected inheritance data. Not surprisingly, he was also an influential member of the eugenics section of the American Breeders Association, a group of agricultural breeders and biologists. This group included many prominent figures, including the famed inventor Alexander Graham Bell. Davenport's second in command, Harry H. Laughlin, became the eugenics expert for the House of Committee on Immigration and Naturalization, and played a critical role in shaping the 1924 Immigration Act, one of the most sweeping and restrictive pieces of legislation in American history. When eugenics thought of degenerates, they automatically focused on the South. To make his point, Davenport said outright that if a federal policy regulating immigration was not put in place, New York would turn into Mississippi. Oh, I love it. Listen to this right here. Echoing James Gilmore down in Tennessee, Davenport's work expressed a grave concern over indiscriminate mating that occurred in isolated shacks. Brothers slept with sisters, fathers with daughters, and a fear of an inbred stock seemed very real. Now, when I've been telling y'all that these motherfuckers is inbred for so long, man, super duper inbred, but it's in her book about white people saying it, that was a fear of theirs. Yet they're so civilized, they're so human, they're not savages. Last paragraph. Almost all eugenists analyzed human, and animal breeding, meaning they made it singular. Davenport described the best female breeders as women with large hips, using the same thinking that animal breeders had employed for centuries to describe cows. The biggest donor to the eugenics record office was Miss Mary Harriman, a widow of rail magnate Averell Harriman. She came from a family of avid horse breeders. Alexander Graham Bell imagined rearing human thoroughbreds, saying 4 generations of superior parents would produce one thoroughbred. A wealthy, a wealthy New York horse breeder, William Stokes, published a eugenics book in 1917 and went so far to contend that Americans could be bred class could the Americans could be bred to class, guaranteeing that the intellectual capacity matched one's station. He popularly argued that the right of the unborn to be born healthy. Why should one generation be punished for the bad breeding choices of the parents? Now, listen. This goes into what we deal with right now in modern day. People make horrible decisions as who they want to make babies with, and then they want to blame everybody else for why they make these fucked up decisions. It's crazy, but just understand that they're using eugenics to justify number one, not blood mixing. Okay, number two, is she's moved off the idea of them being white trash to the fact that we can fix them. Okay? Understand the mentality here. It goes from we can fix them. And then for them to be worried about there being a stock of just a bunch of inbred people, that means that regular ass white dudes were doing this shit too. Believe that. Because if most of your stock are people who are teetering or who have a little bit, then they should have more decency than that. But that means that the people that you think should have more decency don't. Right. Right. It just told you, brothers and sisters, fathers and daughters, and you know mothers and sons. And it didn't throw that in there, but you know that was happening too. Here we go. Last paragraph of page 195. Eugenists were divided over the role women should play in the national campaign. Some insisted that they remain guardians of the herd. Here we go. Talking about white women loving black men. Here we go. This ideal coincided with the traditional Southern ethos that asserted planter and middle class women possessed a natural aversion to associating with black men. It means that they just naturally wanted to do that. Associating. What do you think they mean by that word associating? Right. And I'm not proud of that. I'm just saying that they try to make it seem as if only white men slept with black women, and that's all, and that's how all the mulattoes got here. That's how all the mixed people. That's so far from the truth that this is the only line in the whole thing that even speaks on white women breeding interracially, and it doesn't even speak on white women doing it interracially. They say associating with black men. The New York horse breeder Stokes called on women to scrutinize potential suitors, demanding family pedigrees and subjecting the man to a physical examination. It is easy to see how he borrowed from the horse breeder's demand for pedigree papers, not to mention the proverbial gift horse mouth inspection. Popular for young women to pledge to a eugenic marriage, accepting no man who did not meet her high scientific standards. In 1908, a concerned teacher in Louisiana started Better Babies contests in which mothers allowed their offspring to be examined and graded. This program expanded into fitter family competitions at state fairs. The contests were held in stock grounds, and families were judged in the matter of cattle. Are you hearing this? Because they had to see where white people were progressing because they were like, holy shit, dude, we've just let ourselves go. Right. Because they allowed them to be poor and stupid, not realizing that, like, once again, these dudes are one paycheck away from being just like this, themselves, and yet they could treat themselves like this 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, 500 years ago. And it was normal for them. Right on. It didn't become a problem that fathers were sleeping with daughters until the world was becoming involved in the politics of America. And so therefore, things that were obviously frowned upon universally had to be looked at and then had to be scrutinized going forward. Educated women were the gatekeepers, the guardian of eugenic marriages. Though bassoon poor women continued to outbreed their female betters, so-called experts contended that those who overindulge in sexual activity and lack intellectual restraint were more likely to have feeble children. Here they were imagining poor whites fornicating in the bushes. Once Once experts like Davenport identified harlotry and poverty as inherited traits, sexually aggressive women of the lower classes were viewed as carriers of degenerate germ protoplasm. In 1910, Henry Goddard, who ran a testing laboratory at a school for feeble-minded boys and girls in Vineyard, New Jersey, invented a new eugenic. This is crazy. Classification. Hold on. Take it. Moron. The moron. More intelligent than idiots and imbeciles, morons were especially troublesome because they could pass as normal. Now stop. Now this is what me and Andre Wickham were talking about the other day. The functioning retard, aka the moron, who is once again more intelligent than idiots and imbeciles. Morons were especially troublesome because what? And they still are because what? They can pass as normal. Female normals could enter polite homes as servants and seduce young men or be seduced by them. It was thought to be a real problem. Mm, mm, mm. Caring for, let's just keep going. This is picture of this little man. This little dude is woo. Let me see if I can't get this onto the camera. This dude is, man. Look at little dude, y'all. Look at that dude, man. He looks sick, yo. You feel me? And that's and check it out. The little dude is 23. Who's right next to a normal sized man who's 21. Right on. Dude, look, and man, come on. And they say they came from eating dirt. But that come from being inbred. Anyway. You see how white people tried to like cover up like what they did? So they like tried to make it seem like, oh, they were all messed up because they were eating dirt. No, it's because they're inbred, dude. Anyway. Listen, I'm gonna read to this page to you. Carrie Buck and her mother, Emma, 1924. Carrie and her mother, Carrie's illegitimate daughter, were put on trial in Buck versus Bell, 1927. Their crime was one pedigree, a defective breed perpetuated over 3 generations. Something I had talked about at the very beginning of this chapter. Right on. 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. They said, look, we don't need to trust that. Now look at their faces. Let me see if this camera will let me get a good shot on these two people. However, I hope that's good enough because that's what they look like. They look fairly normal to me. But then again, I never dealt with them, so I can't tell you if they're normal or not. Here we go. This is the last part of this chapter, Thoroughbreds and Scallywags. Let's just read this real quick. It should seem odd to us that the high tide of eugenics coexisted with the storied glamour of the roaring 20s. Lindbergh's transatlantic flight, lighthearted flappers, and unpoliced speakeasies. Yet even the flappers were warned that their darning dancing style too closely resembled those who had gypsy, i.e., black blood. They would be better served to settle down with with a eugenically stable, suitable mate. If there was ever a time when class consciousness sank deep roots, this was it. The 1920s saw social exclusiveness masquerade as science and disdain for rural backwardness, and the mongrel taint intensified, and the culture under siege. White trash meant impure and not quite white, and like the moron, somehow passed into the middle class. The ill-bred bastard gave a watchful people a new set of social hazards to look out for, while they listened, while they listened to the stock ticker and marched off a cliff with the market crash in 1929. So we have to recognize, I mean, and I want to be, fair about it all. I do. But it's like, in fairness to the book and in fairness into what she's saying, y'all got to recognize what I've been saying for a long time about black and white skin and white and black skin. There's a lot of dudes who are black right now. They got white grandpas. These niggas will tell you that they got a white granddaddy. And I'm talking about on their daddy's side, not their mama's daddy. Is some white dude. They daddy's a white dude. That is a fucking white guy, bruh. That is a white person. I don't care what you say. They're white. No matter how dark their skin is, no matter how much they done bred that shit out of them, that's still a white person when you go all the way back. And so that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with people who don't know nothing. They don't know anything about their history. That's the problem. However, forgotten men and poor folk, downward mobility, and the Great Depression. This is chapter 9. Shall then this man go hungry, here in lands, blessed by his honor, builded by his hands? Do something for him. Never let him be forgotten. Let him have his daily bread. He who has fed us, now let him be fed. Let us remember his tragic lot. Remember, or ourselves be, or else be ourselves forgot. And this was The Forgotten Man, 1932, Edwin Markham. I'm going to skip on through for a little bit. This is just talking about poor white people during the Depression. Once again, it's like more of the same stuff, just what's the word I'm looking for? Trying to justify why FDR gave these white people what's it called, food stamps and shit like that, what you call welfare, why it was created, and everything about welfare is socialistic. The whole idea was to put these poor whites back to work. Now understand, black people were working just fine. So what was the problem? You know what I'm saying? It's just, I don't know, man. You know, like it's just like real crazy. Like I just wanted to skip right through this chapter, really, because I mean it doesn't really talk about nothing, other than what I'm saying right now. Is like, let me read this last page to you. This last part of this last page. The Southern Negro. This is on page 230. The Southern Negro is not an incurably ignorant ape. The Southern white masses are not biologically degenerate. Daniels was unwavering in his belief that Jeffersonian democracy had long since died, only to be replaced by demagogues on the order of Huey Long, who, following the hills of generations of Southern patricians, plundered the people at will. He took up Odom's cautionary advice, insisting that all planning for Southern revival had to start at the bottom if it was to affect anything approaching real change. Maybe still one Reb can beat 10 Yanks, wrote Daniels, but it is irrelevant. Rebel pride had blinded all classes. The tyrants and plutocrats and poor all need teaching, and one of them no more than the others. So listen to this. This is white people's honest admission that it wasn't the degeneracy of the attitude was not solely relegated to poor white people. It was all classes, right on. And they gave it only to the South because the South was like, we don't want to integrate. You see what I'm talking about? The unwillingness to integrate in the South is the they said that was backwardness, but really that was a big part of the eugenics thing. You see what I'm talking about? So it's just funny that they say that because the North obviously had free blacks for a long time, mulattoes running around getting white women pregnant, and black men running around getting white women pregnant, white men running around getting mulatto women and black women pregnant of all diasporas. And so, if that's the case, once again, is the South tripping when they're like, we want to stay pure blood? Well, who's really the more pure white person? These inbred people or these people who've been blood mixing with other people the whole time? And then who are really the white trash? Are the white trash really the people that are half breeds, or the people that are inbred? Understand? They are distinguishing the differences between all these different kinds of peoples as it goes down. I think this is let me see. Yep, this is the last chapter before part 3 starts. And so this is chapter 10, The Cult of the Country Boy. This kind of just talks about like Elvis is a big part of it. LBJ is a big part of it. But really what they try to do is they try to show how like the country boy was used to like he became like a positive image. You know what I'm saying? Like Lyndon B. Johnson, when JFK was killed, his southern mentality and demeanor, though I could give a damn for either one, was somehow able to keep poor whites from acting crazy when JFK got killed, and movies started to change. This is another big one. It doesn't too much talk about all of the trailer parks and trailer trash per se, but it starts to break into that from the country boy, and really just like I'm gonna read something to you. Here we go, page 236. Here we go. In the face of social upheaval, as so many old boundaries and prejudices shifted, Americans generally denied what they remain, highly class conscious. The interconnected civil rights movement and cultural wars of the 50s and 60s were marked by social stratification. As ownership of home and suburbs came to represent the American dream, the most controversial housing option, significantly, the trailer park segregation then was more than simply a racial issue. Zoning laws made it inevitable that housing would adhere to class delineated geography. So what it means is that what they're trying to say is that even though the civil rights is going on and they're trying to make, once again, this is a way to diminish everything that black people have been through. She's trying to make it seem like people living in trailer parks or where white people live is more important than black people being treated as if they're actually human beings. And we don't give a damn if white people treat us like we're human beings, right on? Just don't treat us like we're not human beings. However, she once again went out of her way to dabber down what the civil rights was. She dabbered down what slavery was. She dabbered down the whole Civil War thing, all this whole book, she dabbered down a lot of thing about blacks and like colored people in general, but for sure black people. You see what I'm saying? For sure black people, you know. And this same white woman, I don't care what she says, you know, she looked inbred or something like that to me. She looked hella, she just looked sick. But anyway, y'all seen her. Y'all been watching, y'all seen her. One second. Here we go. As Elvis became the country squire of Graceland, middle class, this is page 237, this is the second paragraph. Middle class Americans found themselves promoting the merits of suburbia more generally. Vice President Richard Nixon, for one, saw the expanding housing market as a powerful tool in waging Cold War diplomacy. In 1959, the two world superpowers agreed to a cultural exchange. The Soviets prepared to exhibit on Sputnik and space exploration, which was put on display in New York City. For its part, the United States chose an earthbound emblem of its national pride, a typical ranch-style home, which was set up in Sokolniki Park for the edification of Russian crowds. Speaking at the opening ceremony in Moscow, Nixon took stock of the 31 million American families that own homes, the 41 million citizens that drove 56 million cars, and the 50 million who watched their television sets. At this opportunistic moment, the vice president did his best to wear multiple hats, sounding on the one hand like a Madison Avenue ad man, and on the other as the prophet of the new middle class. Either way, he explicitly denied being representative of a shallow materialism. The real wonder of America's achievement, he professed, was that the world's largest capitalist country had come closest to the ideal of prosperity for all and a classless society. These words strike at the heart of the matter. For Nixon, the United States was more than a land of plenty. Democratic in its collective soul, it had nearly achieved a kind of utopia. For the first time in history, capitalism was not the engine of greed aimed at monopolizing wealth and resources. Free enterprise in the 1950s was the magic elixir that was succeeding in erasing class lines, especially through home ownership, or so he wanted understood. Now listen to this. We all know that's bullshit. We all know that capitalism is a fucking engine for greed no matter how you run it, okay? It's just if you're not greedy, you don't practice the greed within the natural mechanism of capitalism. However, that doesn't change people from being greedy, and that doesn't change capitalism from having a greedy notion within itself altogether. Another thing is this lady right here, you see, and I'm gonna keep reading. She obviously supports Nixon. And notice when she's talking about middle class, and he calls America's classless, she doesn't get on Nixon's ass. You see what I'm saying? She doesn't bash Nixon for calling it a classless society. She doesn't get on him at all. And who are these middle class people if they weren't at one time poor white people? Man, come on. I want y'all to think about this stuff, man. You know, 30 years later, after the New Deal, people had got jobs that they normally wouldn't have got. People were able to get loans for homes that they wouldn't normally be able to get, were able to get the houses for next to nothing, property for next to nothing, build the property up, build the house up. Now they live in a society or a neighborhood where, once again, only white people from a certain area came. They then start to draw the property lines and keep black people out, even though she says that it's not a race thing, it was a race thing. Okay, that's why they did that. That's why they did the zoning the way that they did and the redlining the way that they did that, because it made it possible for these people to discriminate against blacks. Now, once again, she's not talking about this, and she's talking about class, right? Yet she's not talking about the other classes of people that have been affected by these poor white trash people. Right on? The slaves are a class of people within a caste or within a system. And yet she made it seem as if the slave class was somehow had it better than the white freeman class who were fucking lazy. It's crazy. Absolutely absurd. Skipping forward a few pages. No, I don't even want to keep reading about trailers and stuff like that. She talks about trailers for a long time, y'all. You know what I'm saying? Here we go. Here we go. Now, here we go. "1957 was a crucial year of social experiment." This is page 247. This is the third paragraph in. Second paragraph in, excuse me. "And conscience raising. Little Rock, Arkansas grabbed national and international attention when Governor Orville Faubus thwarted the racial desegregation of Central High School. On September 4, 15-year-old Elizabeth Eckford attempted to enter the school building but was blocked by Arkansas National Guard outside the classroom building. Reporters had gathered. Will Counts of the Arkansas Democratic and Johnny Jenkins of the Arkansas Gazette set the tone for how the day would be remembered. They're almost identical photographs of the lone student's stoic walk ahead of an angry crowd seemed to capture the way class and race were defined in the confrontation. Now I'm gonna skip forward to this picture. I'm gonna show you the picture of this chick real quick, right? And I'm not criticizing her, but I don't know black people that grow hair like this. Give a damn what you tell me. I'm saying her hair looks super duper fucking curly. And once again, they always pick somebody who's not exactly us to represent us. Rosa Parks, man, dude, Rosa Parks don't look like no nigga I know. Don't nobody I know who's that light skinned, who's a black person, have hair that lay down like that. Okay? Can you dig it? Her shit lay down like that all on its own because she's probably mixed 100. And people don't want to hear this, but it's like we're always represented by other people that are not us. And this is another big point of the book that I'm trying to make is that like when they throw words like mongrel, mulatto, barbarian, nigger, free blacks, okay, Africans, Mexicans, when they throw this shit around, aboriginal, when they throw it around, and she's using certain words synonymously, and then certain words like they're antonyms, but really it's the same word. I can only shrug my shoulders. I don't get it. But we're gonna keep moving forward. Oh my goodness. I got a little bookmark here. Let's see. Let's see. Here we go. Page 255. Very first paragraph. By the 50s, redneck had come to be synonymous with an almost insane bigotry. The actor playing Bob Ewell was scrawny, and one reviewer even called him degenerate, suggesting the persistence of the older hereditary correlation between shriveled body and a contracted mind. They're saying because obviously these guys didn't eat good, that they didn't think good. However, that has a lot to do with it. What you do, what a person does have, to diet with, actually does dictate how they go about many things. Here we go, though. Sensationalizing redneck behavior did not just occur on the big screen, however. In Nashville, 1957, the racist troublemaker at the head of the mob with an affected Southern accent was a paid agitator from Camden, New Jersey. See, it's the kind of shit I'm talking about. That's the kind of shit I'm talking about right there. He's supposed to be from Camden, New Jersey, yet he's playing a white trash dude, and they want you to think that there's a difference between a high up dude who's a white guy and a low down dirty ass white dude. There's no difference. They are the same people. Only one has money, one does not. For filmmakers, the allure of redneck characters was double-edged. On one hand, they were ready-made villains. On the other, they were men without inhibitions. How is that not both bad things? That's horrible. That's horrible. They're both horrible. Like, what kind of that's not a good double-edged sword. Like, normally, like, one of the edges is good for you. You know what I mean? Like you can use one of the edges. Like, both of those edges are shitty. A ready-made villain. So they're like, outside of picking a black person, you could just make them a redneck, and then that makes them a villain off tops, right? Because that's how they looked at poor white people, apparently. And now he's also men without inhibitions. Unrestrained and undomesticated, they stood in sharp contrast to the boxed-in suburbanite and could occasionally be appreciated for their earthy machismo. These are her own words, not mine. Sloan Wilson's male protagonist in The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, another novel made into a Hollywood film starring Gregory Peck, was a pale imitation of the primal Cajun doing his dance to drum beats. James Dean, Elvis Presley, Marlon Brando, and even Timothy Carey as poor white trash were all unreformed Americans, undomestic and unconventional. They planted a wild seed, taunting conformist male spectators who might be itching to break loose. Redneck and white trash often used interchangeably, though not everyone agreed that the two terms were synonymous. And as Southerner discoverers by the South, Jonathan Daniels had insisted not all humbly born Southerner men were po-whites. He gave us examples as Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, Southern folk whose necks were rigid and red with the sun. Here he goes. He thus divided the poor into two camps: the worthy hardworking who strove to move up the social ladder, and the vulgar and hopeless who were trapped on its lowest rung. His worthy poor, having the stout earthly qualities of the redneck, borrowed from the older class of yeomen, a category that no longer meant what it once had. That said, Daniel's observation was not historically accurate. As we know, Jackson was vilified by his enemies as a violent and lawless cracker, and Lincoln was disparately termed a poor white mudslug. Even Daniels had to admit that many other Southerners defined redneck as one who was raised on hate. He despised blacks and demeaned nigger lovers. In the mold of Bob Ewell, he stood prepared to stick a knife in the back of any man who crossed him. That then was the label that stuck. And what about the hillbilly? Though the redneck and hillbilly were both defined by the American Dialect Society as uncouth countrymen, the following regional distinction was offered. Hillbillies came from the hills and rednecks came from the swamps. So there is no difference between these motherfuckers. That's all I'm trying to get at with y'all. They're not different. They are most definitely the same people. Moving forward. Oh my goodness. I don't want to read nothing about LBJ. Here we go. I just want to read. No, we don't need to read that. That's not important. All right. I'm on to part 3. And we're not going to start that today. I'm going to do that tomorrow. Part 3 is fairly short. So I'll do the last chapter, I want to say. And then the epilogue. But however, man, this book is crazy. And it's called Redneck Roots: Deliverance, Billy Bear, and Tammy Faye. Now, I know, once again, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but it's a huge deal because you have a person who book is a bestseller. It's a New York Times bestseller. And it is by far vehemently racist. And I know that because she uses the catalyst of being a historian as the reasoning behind why she uses so much of this incendiary language. It really doesn't justify the use of the language because it's not explained as to why she used the language when she used it. So just like any old uncouth white person, with no real home training, she did what they always do. And guess who loved this book? White people, because it excuses them from all that they've done and all that they haven't done. So the fact that they haven't been good husbandmen to the land, the fact that they've been horrible and atrocious to this country, to this continent, it excuses them from all that, and it makes it to where they're placated. See what I'm saying? She's placated these people. It, once again, of the worst kind of people, of the absolute worst kind, they are, when they're able to distinguish one form of evil from the other as if one is truly greater than the other, when they both have like drastic outcomes. Slavery. You guys heard me spoke on it way earlier in the book, where it speaks on blacks who were committed to northern asylums in the north, blacks who were committed to the asylums in the north. How do you think they did all these experiments on black people here in America, man? Because when they became free, a lot of them they was snatching on up. They're not going to talk about that. This book's not meant to do that. This is a review of just how she wrote and presented the idea of white trash. But my review so far, once again, has been one of a man who's critical because there's too many things missing from what she says, and then what she means. So tomorrow I'm gonna start the part 3 with playing the rest of that interview. For the most part, I'll skip the parts that aren't really important, but there's a lot of things coming to the end of it that she exposes that are really important. And I just wanted y'all to see how the questions in the interview had nothing. I've been reading all kinds of stuff from this book. The interview has nothing to do with the book, almost at all, almost completely nothing to do with it. And they isolate the interview to being about specific moments that have nothing to do with the actual idea of white trash. Once again, is white trash people who aren't exactly pure white? They can't be right when they claim that they come from Anglo blood, and some of the poor whites hate black people with a passion because they know they ain't got no black in them. And then some of the other ones who act like they hate white people, they really don't feel like that because some of them kind of know, like, or they kind of heard, like, man, you got a black grandpa, you got a black grandma, man, what you talking about? Or the worst case scenario, they're half black and they can really pass for white. Oh my goodness, the worst of the worst. They are the worst of the worst because they can pass, so they pass, and then they never act black. And who knows how many people lived like that back then who could just pass for being black, and made a living like that. This book is, once again, very difficult to read. If you decide to order it, good for you, because it's not easy to devour all that and not feel as if your mind is not being somehow manipulated, or she's trying to get you to like okay what they did during slavery. And then the fact that she totally overlooks the disparaging situation with the Native Americans. It's just something that, like, once again, it doesn't make sense for her to talk about white trash. She could, if she's going to use other people to prop up her argument, she can use those other people more fully in the argument, and compare their plight to the other person's plight, and not make it seem like, oh, these poor whites just have it harder than natives and blacks who they used to be able to oppress, and they still oppress to this day. However, this is part 2 of White Trash Review. I appreciate you for your time. Very grateful for it. I will do this next one tomorrow, and then I'm hopefully I can get this Eskimo Joe thing done by Thursday and get that produced and have that on my other channel. However, y'all, thank you for your time. Take it easy. I'm out.